Yeah, good morning, dear students. Today, let us start reading skill. Before discussing reading skill, first let us try to understand what is reading. The academic success of the students depends on their reading habits. Generally, different students may have different reading habits. Based on those reading habits, generally, we may find the success. We may see the success of the students. Academic success of the student. The Education Commission, 1964 to 66. That Education Commission accepted English as a library language. Accepted English as library language. Right? So, library language. Why they termed it as a library language? Because this language is the means that reading, which means library language means reading is the most important skill. Reading is the most important skill at the highest stages of learning. Reading by his own. Okay, reading by the student at the higher educational institutions or at the higher stages of the learning is important. Reading means not simply reading, not simply reading a newspaper and reading the titles of movies. Reading means understanding what writers has said. Meaning is understanding what writer has said. Right? So, if you are able to understand what the writer has said, then it is reading. Then it is reading. Right? Understanding a written text means extracting the required information, which means not only reading the lines, but reading between the lines and reading beyond the lines. Try to understand this statement carefully. Understanding a written text means extracting the required information, What is the process of extracting the required information? Extracting the required information means not only reading the lines, but reading between the lines and reading beyond the lines. Reading between the lines and reading beyond the lines, right? So, that is understanding. So, what is reading? Understanding. Reading means understand. Then what is the understanding a written text? Extracting the required information by reading between the lines and reading beyond the lines. It is not simply reading the lines. It is not simply reading the lines. It is reading beyond the lines and reading between the lines. Okay, one should be able to understand what is the information or what idea can be extracted from the lines or extracted between the lines, right? So, reading is an active process which involves the mental faculties. Reading is an active process which involves the mental faculties. What is faculty? Faculty is power. Here, reading is an active process which involves, in this reading process involves the mental powers, So even the reading process is also the mental power. Even the reading process is also the mental power, right? So it is also necessary that the reader, it is also necessary that the reader should have knowledge of the morphology, syntax, and semantics to interpret the written word. Okay, so for any reader, these are the prerequisites. For any reader, these are the prerequisites. That is, the knowledge of morphology, the knowledge of syntax, and the knowledge of semantics to interpret the written word. Okay. What is morphology? The knowledge of the words. The knowledge of the words. Then what is syntax? The knowledge of the sentence pattern or the knowledge of the sentence structures. Then what is semantics? The meaning of those sentences, the contextual meaning of those sentences, or we can say denotative meaning and connotative meaning, or a literal meaning and extracted meaning. These are all comes under semantics. That's why it is also necessary that the reader should have the knowledge of morphology, syntax, and semantics to interpret the written word, right? So, reading implies the meeting of the mind of the other with the mind of the reader. So, earlier we discussed one point that reading means understanding what the writer has said. Reading is understanding what the writer has said. Okay, here we can say, we can imply that the reading implies that the meeting of the mind of the other with the mind of the reader. Okay, when the author writes something, he may write with a particular intention. He may write keeping something in his mind. The reader should be able to reach that point. He should be able to understand what exactly in the mind of the author, in the mind of the writer. Okay, that's why we can say reading implies the meeting of the mind of the author with the mind of the reader. Already I told you. Reading is also one of the faculties, one of the mental faculties, like reading, like speaking and listening. Okay, here it is also a mental faculty. That's why the meeting of the mind, both minds should be met. Both minds, the mind of the author should be met with the mind of the reader, right? A written text contains in itself facts, ideas, and values of the society, along with the levels of maturity of the mind of the author. A written text contains in itself. What do we find in the written text? What do we find in the written text? What are the facts and ideas and values of the society, along with the level of the maturity of the mind of the author? So, in that written text, the author might have imbibed or might have projected the facts, ideas, and values of society, along with the level of the maturity of the mind of the other. Okay, based on the maturity of the mind of the other, okay, he may present the facts, ideas, and values of the society to the reader, right? In purpose of reading, the purpose of reading is the advancement of the learning. As a student, when you read something, that is the purpose of advancing your knowledge. That may be the purpose of advancing your learning skill, your learning subject matter. The purpose of reading is the advancement of learning, which leads to the growth of education and enlightenment. Okay, education, growth of the education and enlightenment. Okay, when we read something, when we learn something, there should be proper enlightenment. And that's why reading leads. Surely the reading leads to the growth of the education. The reading leads to the growth of the education and enlightenment. Right? So the purpose of reading is the advancement of learning. The purpose of reading is the advancement of learning. Okay, as a student, as a postgraduate student, you may read. You have to read for the advancement of learning. Instead of teaching by the teacher, instead of the information, instead of the notes taken in the classroom, you are supposed to read many sources so that you can enhance your knowledge, so that you can enlighten. You can get the enlightenment, right? So we may read for, generally, we may read for comprehension and we may read for perception. As a learner of English language, you may read for concept comprehension and you may read for perception. Okay. Now let us know what is the process of reading. What is the process of reading? Okay. In this process of reading, effective reading is an important skill. Effective reading is an important skill that demands conscious and sustained cultivation of good reading material. What is the cultivation? Try to develop. Try to develop. Try to do some work to develop the knowledge. Effective reading, not a simple reading. When you read something, you should be able to read effectively. Effective reading is an important skill that demands conscious and sustained cultivation. That demands conscious and sustained cultivation of good reading material. Sustained, not a discrete. It should be continuous. Okay, so that should be, that reading needs, the effective reading requires consciousness, at the same time sustained cultivation of good reading material, Reading is a complex mental process. Reading is complex mental process. It is not a simple process. It is complex because many factors may influence. Many factors may involve. Many things may involve in this reading process. Reading comprises recognition, perception, comprehension, and association. Recognition, perception, comprehension, and association, right? So reading is a complex process, mental process. It comprises recognition, perception, comprehension, and association, right? These are the elements. This is the process, how the reading may happen. First recognition, then perception, then comprehension, then association, right? So what is recognition? When we read something, we should recognize the words. So recognition of words, which are symbols of facts and ideas. When you read a material, in that material you may find words. You should know that here. Those words are symbols of facts and ideas. Symbols of facts and ideas. So when you read the material, reading material, you should be mindful to those facts and ideas that are conveyed by the symbols, that are conveyed by the symbols. It requires a good knowledge of vocabulary. It requires a good knowledge of vocabulary. So when we read something, we have to identify, we have to recognize these symbols. But these symbols, these symbols, by understanding the facts and ideas that are conveyed by these symbols. But here, it requires, that recognition of words requires a good knowledge of vocabulary. It requires a good knowledge of vocabulary, its spelling and pronunciation, which leads to the group of phonic and morphophonic structures of particular language. Okay, these are all, this vocabulary, spelling and pronunciation, these are all leads to the group of phonetic and morphophonemic structures of a particular language. So good knowledge of vocabulary is important. Okay, you should know whether it is noun or pronoun or verb or adjective or adverb. And you should know how the context, what may be the contextual meaning of that particular word in that particular text. Okay, not only the vocabulary, its pronunciation and its spelling is also important. Okay, so C, S-E-A-C is different from S-E-E-C. Okay. When you pronounce such words, for example, S-N-A-K-E, snake, but S-N-A-C-K, snack. S-N-A-K-E, snake. S-N-A-C-K, snack. The pronunciation is different. At the same time, the spelling is also different. Snake, S-N-A-K-E, snake. S-N-A-C-K, snack. Right? So we should be able to pronounce exactly, and we should be able to know the spelling exactly. Okay, even when we read that particular text, when we read those sentences, right? So when we read the text, we should have knowledge of vocabulary, its spelling, and the pronunciation. That is recognition of words, first step. Or in this process, this is the first step. After recognizing the words, we have to perceive those words. After recognizing the words, we have to perceive those words. What is the perception here? Perception is the translation of symbols into meanings. When we receive the symbols, out of those symbols, we should be able to extract facts and meanings, what the writer expressed, or what the writer conveyed. Okay, perception is the translation of symbols into meaning. it is required to have an awareness of the common grammatical categories, to perceive, to translate the symbols into meaning. This process may happen in your mind, you know. When you recognize by seeing those words, you may feel some sense. Then these symbols may be translated into meaning in your mind. But it is required to have an awareness of the common grammatical categories. When you read, when you try to perceive the information, what you read, you should have, okay, this is the prerequisite. You should have awareness of the common grammatical categories, such as singular, plural, masculine and feminine, active and passive, sequence of tenses, use of the articles, etc. Okay, we know many. Likewise, there are some grammatical categories, common grammatical categories of English language. As a reader, you should have enough knowledge in this. Okay, if you have enough knowledge in this grammatical categories such as singular, plural, masculine and feminine, active and passive, sequence of tenses, use of articles, etc. Right? Okay, that is perception. When you recognize the words, you should perceive that information. We may perceive that information. That is the second step. Perception is the second step. And now the third one is comprehension. Third one is comprehension. Right? So, comprehension is understanding of meaning and putting it in a context. Understanding of meaning. Okay, in the perception, we may translate the symbols into meaning. Then, in this comprehension, we may understand that meaning and putting it in a context. We may put it in a context, thereby reconstructing the whole idea presented by the author. Once, when we comprehend the meaning of the verse, then we may try to reconstruct the meaning of the sentence, not the verse, the meaning of the sentence. Okay, individually the words may have their own meaning, but in that sentence, what may be the meaning? We can say the contextual meaning or the literal meaning in that context. So, comprehension is understanding of meaning and putting it in a context, thereby reconstructing the whole idea presented by the author. This leads to the problem of denotation, that is literal meaning, and connotation, that is interpretative meaning. In this process, we may face two problems. Okay, that is denotation. What is denotation and what is connotation? Okay, denotation is literal meaning of the sentence. Literal meaning of the sentence. Okay, but when the writer expresses something, okay, apart from the general sense, he may express some another sense. He may express some another sense. He may attribute a meaning to the word. He may convey a secondary meaning to that particular word. Okay, that is connotation. So, in this comprehension, we may try to understand the meaning and we may put it into a context by reconstructing the whole idea presented by the author. By doing so, we may totally comprehend the sentence. In this, this may lead to the problem of denotation and connotation. What does it mean? We should have enough knowledge. We should have enough knowledge. What is denotation and what is connotation, and how the others may connotate something. We should know that. One has to learn to read between the lines. To comprehend something, one has to learn to read between the lines. For example, I went to my sister and took dinner. I went to my sister and took dinner. What may happen between these two? He may enter the house. He may wish his sister's family. He may have some chat with the family members. At time comes, he may eat. He may eat. He might have eaten along with his sister's family members. But narrating all these things is simply mentioned that I went to my sister and ate dinner. Simply. What does it mean? What does it mean? Here, simply, he is narrating, he expressed two statements only, but we can understand what has happened between these two, right? That should be the capability of the reader to understand what happened between the lines. What happened between the lines? I think in an intermediate you might have done one activity. You might have done one activity, that is jumbling. Okay, rearranging the jumbled sentences. Rearranging the jumbled sentences. Then, based on this, your capability to read between the lines, you may be able to read. You may be able to rearrange those statements, right? So the third phase is comprehension. And now the fourth one, the last one, association. Association follows comprehension. After comprehension, we may do association. Here, what is association? Okay, synthesizing the new ideas, and knowledge with the old ideas and knowledge for better understanding, right? Here, new ideas and knowledge are synthesized with the old, for better understanding, and by making it relevant to the present situation. In this association, we may associate the old knowledge with the new knowledge. We may associate the old knowledge with the new knowledge. Then we may find we may have better understanding. By making it relevant to the situation, relevant to the present situation. In this association, when we receive some information, we may make it relevant. We may relate that information to the present situation. Okay, in a novel, you might have studied the disaster, the pandemic situation. That may be flu fever, influenza flu, or malaria. Then you can connect that situation in a particular novel to this present situation, COVID. We may connect. We may try to analyze in such a way. We may associate. The knowledge. Okay, we may associate the knowledge. Okay, in this reading, we discussed what is reading. We discussed some points, how it was accepted as a library language by the education, English as a library language by the Education Commission, which imparts the importance of reading skill, which implies the importance of reading skill. Even what we discussed, what is reading, that is understanding. Even we discussed what is understanding, that is extracting the required information, which means not only reading the lines, but reading between the lines and reading beyond the lines. And we discussed that it is a mental